Chapter 15. The Unveiling. As the date of Kenneth's opening for Neptune's Daughter drew closer, the excitement in Providencetown built. National art magazines sent writers and photographers. Reporters from newspapers in New York City, Boston, and even as far away as Washington, D.C. and Chicago arrived to do interviews and get pictures. An invitation to the gala affair following the display at the Mariners Gallery was highly prized. Kenneth told me that since I was now an expert in etiquette and formalities, I would have to help him with the design and wording for the invitations. The gallery owner provided us with a select list of people to invite, claiming these were the people who had invested in art or who carried influence in the community. 2 days before the opening and party, Kenneth called and asked me to accompany him to the judge's house where we would meet with the caterers. I'm not good at these things, he claimed. I need a feminine viewpoint. I knew he was just nervous about going to his father's home. From what I understood, he hadn't been there in years. The judge was nervous about it too. That's something Olivia revealed. This has the makings of a wonderful event, she told me, but we have to be sure there'll be no unpleasantness and certainly nothing that would feed the insatiable appetites of the gossip mongers. I know you've spent an inordinate amount of time at Kenneth's house, and although I haven't seen it yet, I know, and everyone else will know, that you are the model for the work. I'm depending on you to play the role in mitigating any difficult feelings. In other words, she said in a sharp smirk, make sure Kenneth behaves himself. See if you can get him to dress properly and do something with that moss on his face that he calls a beard and that mop he calls his hair. Artists aren't exactly business people, Grandma Olivia. The public understands Kenneth. Not this public, she assured me. Actually, she revealed in a rather rare, softer moment, I'm more worried about the judge. He hasn't slept a night since he volunteered to host the gala celebration. I told him it was a foolish gesture, but he insisted. Everything will work out just fine, I said. She nodded, studying me. You've grown and matured quite a bit since you've been living here. I will tell you that I've heard only good things from your school officials, and people admire the way you look after my handicapped granddaughter. I feel validated for my faith in you and your potential. Don't do anything to diminish that faith, she added in her usual threatening tone. Thank you, I think, I replied, and she almost smiled. You've been to visit my sister and have seen Samuel this week, she asked. Yes. I wondered if she also knew Carrie had driven me there. If she did, she didn't mention it. They're both about the same, no improvement. Grandpa Samuel simply sits and stares most of the time, barely acknowledging and edging that I'm there. There won't be any improvement, she predicted. That's not the place to go for improvement. It's where you go to wait. God's waiting room, she muttered. I imagine you'll have to put me there someday too. If I need to be, don't hesitate, she advised. Hopefully that won't be for a while, but when my time comes, it comes, she concluded. For the gala, Grandmother Olivia suggested I wear the dress Dorothy Livingston had bought me in Beverly Hills. All these months, she'd never mentioned the 2 expensive outfits hanging in my closet, but I knew she was aware of them. There's no point in letting something like that go to waste. If someone's foolish enough to spend that sort of money, well, take advantage of it. I'd like to see you in it first, of course, she added. I nodded and ran upstairs and put it on. She scrutinized me for a few moments and nodded. Suitable, she declared, for such an occasion. You're someone with the position in this community now. You should look the part. There'll be a number of young men from quality families attending too. I hope you make acquaintance with some of these people. Of course, I'll see to it that you're introduced properly. What are you going to do with your hair? My hair? I can have a beautician come and do something special for you if you'd like. No, I think I'll just wear it down. Maybe just trim my bangs. I can do that myself. If you insist, she said. I have a ruby and sapphire necklace that would go with that dress, she added. It was my mother's. Really? Thank you, I said, truly honored that she would entrust me with such a gift for just one night. I told Kenneth about Grandma Olivia's new and improved persona when he had me picked up to go to Judge Childs. I thought he would laugh and make quips about the Queen Lady or something, but he was very distracted by his own thoughts and anxiety. I talked mostly to keep him from riding in dead silence. When we turned up the road that led to the judge's house, Kenneth almost turned the car around. This is a mistake, he muttered. I shouldn't have agreed to it. All we need was a reception at the gallery. Please, Kenneth, you know everyone's looking forward to a big party. We'll make sure it's fun. Fun, he said, as if that were a dirty word. The judge's house came to view. I remembered the first time I'd been here, how much more impressed with it I was than with Grandma Olivia's home. The judge's 3-story Adam colonial had been restored, a wedgwood blue cladding, and had a semicircle entry porch, and it made it more unique with its large octagonal cupola. There was an elaborately decorated frieze above all the front windows. The driveway brought us to the circle where there was a whirl of activity. An army of groundspeople were everywhere, pruning and trimming, cleaning fountains and walkways, washing windows, planting new flowers in the rock gardens. When we entered the circular drive, I could see a huge party tent, in the front of which caterers were discussing the setup with Judge Childs. Beside him was his butler, Morton. Everyone turned to look our way. Kenneth just sat in the Jeep, staring at the front entrance of the house. It must have been very nice growing up here, Kenneth. Yes, it was, he said, and stepped out of the Jeep. Morton approached us as quickly as he could to greet us. Why, hello, Mr. Kenneth. It's good to see you. Good to see you, he said, reaching for Kenneth's hand before Kenneth lifted it. He shook it vigorously and gazed at me. His face was bright with happiness. And you too, Miss Melanie. You're looking fine. Isn't this going to be a celebration? The judge was up an hour earlier than usual this morning. Neither of us could sleep just thinking of the festivities. And it's so good that you're here, Mr. Kenneth. He stood there hoping for some softening in Kenneth's face, some sign that the war between his father and son had ended. Hello, Morton. It's good to see you too, Kenneth said finally, offering him a smile. Morton here was just responsible for my upbringing as my mother and father, Kenneth said. Oh, go on with you, Mr. Kenneth. I didn't do much. No, just catered us kids around everywhere and watched over us, played with us. You taught me how to swing a baseball bat, didn't you, Morton? Morton could have been a pro, he told me. Oh no, Miss Melanie, that's not true. I wasn't that good. He was great. He's awful excited, the judge, Morton said, slapping his hands together. You want me to get you two something? Maybe a lemonade or coffee or... No, nothing, Morton. I want to make this quick, Kenneth said. Morton nodded. Well, I'll be around if you need something. You always were, Kenneth said. It's good to see you, Morton, Kenneth added, warming slightly. Morton's eyes watered. And good to see you. He talks about you all the time, Mr. Kenneth. There isn't a day that goes by. Okay, Kenneth said, turning to me. Let's do this. I followed and we crossed the lawn toward the caterers and Judge Childs. Hello, the judge said, his eyes on Kenneth. Kenneth barely acknowledged him with a small nod. I haven't got much time for this, he said quickly. Oh, well, let's get right to it then. James will tell us the menu and how he wants it to be set up on the serving tables. He suggests we have tables inside and outside the tent, but all the food inside. Is that right, James? The short, neatly groomed man smiled. Yes, Judge. I think that would work. I'll have 3 tables for the entrees, lobster, shrimp, and prime roast and duckling, flounder, and bass. And we'll have 2 long tables for salads and vegetables. And of course, 3 Viennese dessert tables. I suggest that we keep the bar outside the tent. It always makes it less complicated when liquid refreshment is away from the food, he added. We will, however, have a staff bring glasses of champagne to everyone. How's that menu sound? The judge asked. Kenneth was staring at the dock, a distracted expression on his face. Fine with me, he muttered. Now, to the decorations, Jane resumed. I thought a bouquet of our emperor tulips and some daffodils on each table. I would like to suggest a doorway of roses as an entrance to the tent, and this isn't a wedding, Kenneth snapped. He glanced at me for confirmation. I think just some flowers on the table is enough, I said. James nodded with disappointment. I didn't know what to do about the music, the judge said. James here suggested a trio. I thought we could set up a small stage for them over there, he pointed just to the right of the tent. I can get those portable dance floors, and we don't need people dancing, Kenneth said. No? Okay. We'll just have some music, I thought. But if you think that's a bit much. The whole thing is a bit much, Kenneth said and walked toward the dock. Everyone watched him in silence. He's just a little nervous about the showing, I explained. Of course, the judge said. Well then, James can show us the colors he chooses for the tablecloths and napkins. They're right there, he said, gesturing inside the tent. I followed and looked over the suggestions for the interior decorations with the crepe paper, balloons, and tinsel. I thought it was all spectacular. The judge was pleased. I'll have valet parking, of course. Let's just hope for good weather. Well now, what's left to do? He questioned, his eyes gazing after Kenneth. The caterer rattled off a half a dozen things, but the judge had lost his interest. It might not be a bad idea for you two to talk about all this, I suggested softly. He glanced at me and nodded. Yes, I suppose you're right. He looked tired, old, and unsure of himself. Kenneth stood on the dock looking out at the ocean. Let me speak to him first, I said. The judge looked relieved. I hurried over the lawn and joined Kenneth. This is stupid, he said. Half of these people attending thinks art is short for Arthur. I laughed. It'll be nice, Kenneth. Let him make a big deal over you. He wants to do it out of pride. Out of guilt, he corrected. Yes, maybe guilt too, but at least he cares. He feels remorse. My mother shakes off guilt the way he would shake off a fly. He turned his eyes to me and smiled. You feel sorry for him, don't you? Yes, I said. He shook his head. Don't you understand? Haley is the way she is because of what he did. No. Look at what she did to me, I replied. You don't see me turning into my mother. His smile softened and widened. Talk to him, Kenneth. Just make a little peace between you. It'll be good for you and him. He grimaced skeptically. You said Neptune's Daughter was your greatest work, the work that you're most proud of. Let it be a happy time then, from the beginning to the end. Melanie, what am I going to do with you? Despite everything, you keep pushing the gray skies away, searching for that rainbow. Help me find it, Kenneth, I replied, my eyes meeting his gaze firmly. He nodded, sighed, gazed at the water, and then turned back toward the house. Come on, he said. Come on? You're his granddaughter. You belong in every family discussion now. No more false pretenses amongst us. That's my only demand, he said. I trailed beside him as he walked toward the house, his home, a place he hadn't been in years, but a place that held his childhood memories and all the memories of his mother. We entered, and he gave me a tour. He kept it pretty much as I remembered it, Kenneth said. He laughed. My mother and her antiques. Some of these things are worth a lot of money, though. We went upstairs and he showed me what used to be his room. He stood there for a long time, a sad smile on his face. When we descended again, the judge was standing at the doorway of his office. Well, he said, looking from Kenneth to me, this looks like it's going to be the event of the year, huh? I haven't seen your piece, Kenneth, but Lawrence Baker told me it's wonderful. Anybody make a preliminary offer yet? If not, I'd like to make an offer. It's not for sale, Kenneth said. What? I'm thinking of donating it to the museum after the showing. The judge's mouth dropped open. Why? That's a mighty fine idea, Kenneth, mighty fine, he said when he'd finally recovered. Well, if you were going to sell it, I'd buy it myself, I said, wishing Kenneth would accept money for his creation. They both looked at me, then Kenneth laughed. The judge's face broke into a smile, too. I bet she would, he said. She would, Kenneth agreed. At least they were agreeing on something. I'm glad we're having a party here, Ken. Your mother would be very proud, the judge said. Oh, that reminds me, he added quickly. I found something the other day that I thought you might want to have it. He turned and went into the office. We followed. He handed Kenneth a leather picture frame in which there was a photo of his mother and him when he was not more than 5 or 6 years old. He had that serious artistic look even back then, didn't he? The judge asked me. He sure does look deep in thought, I replied. I remembered when Louise brought that frame. She considered it a prime find. That design's all hand-graved or something, he continued as Kenneth continued to stare at the picture of himself and his mother. The judge found it necessary to keep talking. I think it was somewhere down in Buzzards Bay. She would walk into those tiny stores and dig around like some miner looking for gold and came out with the craziest stuff sometimes. When she found that frame, she said she just had to have a picture in it. Thanks, Kenneth said. Oh, sure. So how have things been going otherwise, the judge asked. Otherwise? Kenneth's mouth turned at the corners. I mean, the judge looked at me. Whatever you have to say, she can hear it too. She's your granddaughter, Kenneth said. Yes, she is, the judge said, nodding, and I must say I'm proud of her. Even though it's a deep, dark secret, Kenneth taunted. The judge's eyes grew smaller. He blew some air between his lips and lowered himself on the leather settee, gazing down at the floor like a man who had just received some bad news. There's no sense in my apologizing to you, Kenneth. I've done it 100 times and you won't hear it. Anyway, I don't expect you to forgive me for something I can't forgive myself, but, he said, raising his eyes to Kenneth, none of that has stopped me from loving you, son. I'm proud of you and what you've done. All I hope is that you can come to hate me a little less. That's all, he concluded with a deep sigh. Kenneth turned away for a moment. You betrayed us, all of us. Yes, I did, the judge confessed. I was a weak man. She was beautiful and very desirable woman. It's no excuse, it's just an explanation, he followed quickly. You spent most of your life sitting in judgment on people. Who sat in judgment of you? You did, son. And the price I paid was too much. If I could change things, I would. Kenneth didn't look convinced. Really, I would. I would sooner die than take away your happiness. I wanted only the best for you. None of this had any meaning to me since your mother's death and since all of you children left. He looked at me. It's sort of a miracle that Melanie came back to us. Kenneth glanced at me, then he nodded. Yes, it is. And it pleases me to all get out that she and you have taken to each other. She's a pest, Kenneth teased. I smiled through my teary eyes. Talented, playing that fiddle too. Are you going to play something for us at the party, aren't you, Melanie? What? No, Of course she is, Kenneth said, eyeing me. It's part of our deal. It is? I asked worriedly. Well, good, the judge said, standing again. He seemed to have trouble getting to his feet, swallowing a groan and forcing a smile. I guess I'll get back out there and see what that dandified fellow's gotten planned for me. Wants to string pink roses up the driveway next, he said. And Kenneth laughed. Then, as if remembering himself, Kenneth stopped and turned around at the doorway. He paused in it, looked down at the picture of himself and his mother, and gazed back at the judge. Thanks for this. Sure. We gotta go, he said. Yes, it looks like I have some unexpected practicing to do. I quipped and Kenneth laughed. The judge followed us to the front door. I don't have to say good luck. I know everyone's going to be impressed, he declared. Kenneth nodded. And I could tell he wanted to say thank you. When I looked at the judge, I saw his eyes were full of tears. He bit down on his lip and smiled at me and went back inside. I think he's really sorry, Kenneth. Maybe, he relented. We got in the Jeep and sat there for a while, watching his father come out of the house, wave to us, and walk slowly towards the caterers. He was a very handsome man, always distinguished, gentlemanly. He looked like a judge. When I was a little boy, I thought he had the power to decide life and death. Don't put your faith completely in anyone, Melanie. Reserve some skepticism. It's good insurance. Okay, he said, smiling at me. We'll have a good time. If the Queen will grant you to leave. You're invited to dinner tonight. Holly will be here any minute. She will? Oh, great. Of course I can come. Grandma Olivia wants me to be a good influence on you and get you to look more like a businessman, I know. I might put on a clean pair of pants and socks. He said, and we both laughed. Holly, I thought I couldn't wait to see her again. Holly came laden with gifts for us, charms and crystals, astrological charts, new earrings for me, and a bracelet for Kenneth. After dinner, she and I took a long walk along the beach and talked about my trip to California. Naturally, my sister turned everything around, blamed me for sending such a young, impressionable girl to Los Angeles. Philip said it wasn't surprising, she said with a short laugh. Oh, I hope I didn't make any trouble for you, I said. This isn't a new argument. My sister and her husband have formed their opinions about me long ago. Anyway, Billy wanted me to be sure to give you his best wishes and love. He was touched by you, and I by him. I thought about him and the things he told me many times while I was in Hollywood. Your mother didn't have the slightest. She's like someone under a spell, Holly. If I had known as much before, I would have never gone. I sometimes stop at the graveyard and pretend it's her buried there. She might as well be, I added. She smiled softly, took a deep breath of some fresh ocean air. Cleans out my brain, she said. Well, I see Carrie has won over Kenneth, building his boat. She nodded toward the finished hull. It looks like it's going to be very impressive. He's got his whole heart in it, I said, my whole heart swelling with pride. Not his whole heart. There's some big part of it here, she said, pointing to my chest. I laughed. Tell me about Kenneth, she said after a moment. He looks like he's had some state transition, hovering. His chart indicates that he's about to change direction. I told her about the meeting with his father and the quasi-ceasefire. They're both getting older. It's time for them to settle things, she said, and then turned thoughtful. Does he talk about me much? Oh, you're always on his thoughts, I said. He often says that's something Holly put in your head, or Holly would have a lot to say about that. Really? She smiled. I like it here. I've been thinking about leaving New York. And Billy? I'm thinking about giving him the shop. He'd never leave New York. Where will you live? I asked. We'll see, she said, flashing a smile at me. I'm about to discover if I can read my own future, she added. I've got some strong indications. She beamed and looked back at the house. I'd better get home, I said, uncertain if I should question her more. We'll have a big day tomorrow, thanks to Kenneth. I have to play my fiddle. That's wonderful. Yes, it will be a big day. She took my hand and we ran over the sand dune in our bare feet, laughing, the stars glittering above us. The ocean smooth and gentle and full of promises. It was good to be happy again, to be full of hope. The next day, people showed up nearly a half an hour early to be the first to get in the gallery. Grandma Olivia put on one of her finest dresses and wore a string of pearls, her diamond bracelet and gold rings. She appeared in the foyer as she did and looked like a queen. Judge Childs came by for us in his dark blue suit. He looked as handsome as I'd ever seen him. I tried to get Grant and Lillian to come, he said, referring to his other children, but they were both too busy with their own lives. It's a sad thing when families grow apart, he declared, which was something Grandma Olivia seconded heartedly. Once you lose the ties that bind, you drift into the wind, she said. She looked at me after most of her deep pronouncements these days, making sure I took note. Carrie, Aunt Sarah, and May all dressed up and were waiting outside the gallery when we drove into the adjoining parking lot. Carrie looked handsome in his suit and tie, and May, growing like summer corn, was already 5'1". Even Aunt Sarah had put something bright and cheery on and dabbed on some makeup and lipstick. They're just about to open the doors, Carrie said, and got out of the judge's vehicle. Those people over there are reporters, he added, nodding toward the small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Ken here yet? The judge asked. No, sir, haven't seen him. Be just like him not to show up, Grandma Olivia muttered under her breath. Well, Sarah, how are you? I'm fair to middling, Olivia. It seems like only yesterday, she said, her pale lips trembling. Well, it's not only yesterday. We've all got to get on with our lives. This is a very happy, wonderful occasion for the judge. You shouldn't be here if you're not up to it, she said sharply. Sarah forced a smile. Oh, I'm fine. And May's very excited about it, she said, nodding at Grandma Olivia's granddaughter, whom she had yet to acknowledge. Tell her hello, she ordered, and flashed a smile at May, who smiled back and signed to Grandma Olivia didn't want to find out what she said. She stepped forward with the judge at her side. The gallery doors were open and the people began to stream in, mostly greeting Grandma Olivia and the judge and allowing them to pass through the crowd. Carrie, Aunt Sarah, May, and I followed. Neptune's daughter stood in the center of the room, covered with a sheet. The gallery owner, Lawrence Becker, was a tall, lean man wearing a somber expression. The way he moved, glided across the room in a softly spoken manner, reminded me of an undertaker. His assistants, a man about 24 or 25 and a woman who looked to be in her 30s, greeted people as well. "Good afternoon, the Judge Childs. Good afternoon," Lawrence Becker said. "And Mrs. Logan, thank you all for coming." "Why wouldn't we come?" she snapped back at him. "Oh, I just meant it's nice to see you," he said, and slipped over to another couple. The gallery was soon full, and Kenneth had not yet arrived. I was beginning to get the butterflies in my stomach, thinking he might decide not to appear. How did the judge handle it, and when the big party and the food and music? How would the judge handle it with the big party all set, the food and the music? I looked at Carrie. "When you saw him last, did he say anything about not coming?" I asked him. "He didn't say he wasn't, but he didn't tell me that he wasn't happy about all this fuss." "You don't think he was drinking today?" "No. Holly was there with him, and they were just spending most of the day walking on the beach and talking." "Well," he said with a tight smile, "maybe not just talking." "You didn't spy on them, did you, Carrie Logan?" "No," he said indignantly. I could just tell from the way they were acting that things were going well between them." I was about to apologize when we heard the crowd rise, and the volume of its murmur had been turned to see Kenneth and Holly drive up in the front of the gallery in her tie-dye car. Kenneth had put on his sports jacket, but he wore an old pair of dungarees and a pair of moccasins without socks. His shirt was opened at the collar. Holly wore one of her long dresses, sandals, and beads that reached her waist. She had crystal earrings and a tiara made of crystals and other minerals. "Artists," Grandma Olivia muttered. Despite how Kenneth was dressed, he received an ovation as he entered the gallery. He smiled and nodded and escorted Holly to the foot of Neptune's Daughter. "Well," Lawrence Baker said, stepping up beside Kenneth, "now that the artist is here, we can unveil the creation. As you know, Mr. Childs has named the work Neptune's Daughter. In your program, he describes his own work as a view of Neptune's daughter emerging from the sea, metamorphosing into a beautiful woman. The piece attempts to capture the metamorphosis at the climactic point. Without further ado, let's allow Mr. Childs to unveil Neptune's Daughter." Kenneth stood there a moment, his eyes searching the crowd until they settled on me. He looked impishly happy. Everyone held their breath. The sheet fell away from the statue, and the audience released a single gasp, followed by a loud applause. Grandma Olivia's eyes widened as her mouth opened, stretching the skin over her cheekbones. Then she turned to me, and we both gazed at each other for a long moment. She knew I had been Kenneth's model, but she didn't expect to see a bare-breasted young woman emerging from the water. She turned back to the statue. "Well, well, well," Judge Childs muttered. "I told you this was his best work. What do you think of it, Olivia?" "I think it's shocking," she declared. "I never expected to see such a realistically portrayed female." She stepped forward and studied the face, then looked at the judge. "I know," I heard him say. "I need some more champagne," Grandma Olivia declared, and the judge escorted her to the table. "What do you think of it, Aunt Sarah?" I asked her. "It looks like Haley," she whispered. "Just like her." "Yes, it does." "Jacob wouldn't have approved," she noted. "No, that he wouldn't." "Dad didn't know anything about art," Carrie said. Aunt Sarah's face brightened. "No," she said, "he didn't." I laughed and sang back and forth to May, who was very excited and loved the statue. We listened to the other people complimenting it and complimenting Kenneth, who appeared as uncomfortable with adulation as a man standing in shoes 2 sizes too small. Carrie and I were about to take May outside for some fresh air when Teddy Jackson and his wife and his daughter Michelle and son Adam entered the gallery. A cold electric chill shot through my spine. I hadn't seen the man who was my real father since I returned. Terrified of the moment when I would, Michelle, who disliked me instantly, was actually my half-sister. I couldn't help but search her face and Adam's for any resemblances among us. Fortunately, the Jacksons were quickly approached by the gallery owner and other members of the crowd. "Let's go," I urged Carrie, and we slipped outside. It was getting hot in there. "Mom's not coming to the party," Carrie said. She wants me to take her home first. I'll bring May and meet you there later." "Okay, sure," I replied, still stunned by the sight of Teddy Jackson. "Are you going with Kenneth and Holly?" "Yes," I said. "I'm sort of assigned to him to make sure he shows," I added, and Carrie laughed. Less than an hour later, the invited guests began to leave the gallery and head to Judge Child's home. Kenneth and Holly emerged like two people escaping long school detention and came laughing and hurrying toward me. "Let's get something to drink, and quick," Kenneth cried. I took my fiddle out of the judge's car and stepped into the Jeep. We took off with Kenneth whoop-whooping around the storm, the wind playing havoc with my hair, but my compliments were unheeded. "You got me into this," Kenneth shouted, "grin and bear it." We were lucky. It was one of the nicest spring days, and the wind was warm and gentle. The sky was almost turquoise with puffy dabs of clouds. When we arrived at the trio was playing. Valets were parking cars, balloons were bopping in the wind. Kenneth and Holly headed straight for the outside bar. People converged around him, shaking his hand, patting him on the back. Holly and I helped ourselves to some hors d'oeuvres and wandered around the grounds. "What a beautiful place," she remarked. I showed her some of the house as well. When we emerged, the judge and Grandma Olivia had arrived and were involved in conversations with guests. I looked about but didn't see Carrie and May anywhere. When I spotted the Jackson family again, I felt myself shrivel inside. The caterers began serving the full meal. I wanted to wait for Carrie, but he still hadn't arrived. I couldn't imagine what was keeping him. Finally, I joined Kenneth and Holly, despite my nervous stomach, and tried to eat. After we finished, Teddy Jackson and his wife came to our table to congratulate Kenneth. He shifted his eyes to me, but I looked away. Behind him, Adam grinned, looking as arrogant but as handsome as ever. Michelle, as usual, looked like she was bored out of her mind. My eyes went to the tent entrance, hoping for the sight of Carrie, but he still hadn't arrived. I was about to go into the house and call him when the judge stopped by and whispered something to Kenneth. Then they both looked at me. "It's time." I was able to step out of the limelight. Kenneth said gleefully. I groaned. They wanted me to perform. An announcement was made and the crowd was left to get on the small stage where I had earlier left my fiddle. Most of the people drifted out to hear me play. Kenneth and Holly stood toward the back, both smiling ear to ear. My eyes fell on Teddy Jackson, who wore a soft smile that made my heart pound so hard I feared I might faint in front of all these people. Finally, I found the strength to lift the bow and begin. It was a song about a coal miner's wife who refused to accept the fact that he was dead in a mining accident and sat Virgil at his mine entrance for days and nights, refusing to eat or drink anything. And then one night the miner emerged and there was a great celebration. Once or twice I thought my voice would break, but I kept my eyes closed and envisioned Papa George teaching me the song. When it ended, I received a wonderful ovation, and there was shouts for another song. I played 2 more tunes and then stepped down. Grandma Olivia looked very pleased at some of the way the younger men were vying for my attention. Still, I didn't see Carrie in the crowd, so I excused myself and hurried to the house to call him. He picked up after one ring. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm just out the door. Ma was crying so hard and was so sad I couldn't leave her. She kept thinking about Dad. She finally fell asleep. Did you play yet?" "Yes." "Oh, damn. But I'll play again and again for you, Carrie. Just get here as soon as you can." "On my way," he promised, and I cradled the phone and stood there thinking about poor Aunt Sarah. I was so deep in thought I didn't hear Adam come up behind me until he whispered in my ear, and he dared to kiss the back of my neck. I nearly jumped out of my shoes. "Easy," he said, as if I were a horse, and he was trying to gentle. "I saw you go into the house and I thought we could have a private conversation. You're really getting prettier and prettier, you know. I was hoping," he continued before I could speak, "that you might have realized how good we could be together. I'm a big deal at my college fraternity already, and there's lots of sorority girls to date, but I can't get you out of my mind, Melanie. How about giving us another chance?" he asked, stepping toward me. I backed away, shaking my head. "Get away from me, Adam. I don't know where you get the nerve," I said. He smiled. "I like that, a girl who doesn't give in easily. I'll never give in to you, just stay away. Now why don't you just try to give us a chance? We're both a little older." "I told you, stay away from me. Stay away," I screamed at him. And he reached for me again, and I stopped his hand in midair and grimaced. "What the hell's the matter with you? Who do you think you are, the Princess of Providencetown, just because you can play the fiddle and sing? I'm not good enough for you now?" "No, it's not a matter of who's good enough." "Then what?" he demanded. He looked angry enough to hit me. "Ask your father," I shouted at him. It came out of my mouth before I could swallow it back. He shook his head with confusion. "What?" "Just ask him. Ask him why you and I could never be," I cried, the tears pouring over my lids. I turned and ran out of the room, leaving him twisting and turning in a whirlpool of confusion. At first I felt bad about what I had said, but it felt good about it too, actually relieved. It was as if I passed the curse along and lifted the weight from my shoulders and placed it on the true sinners.